But with that, we are live. If this does wind up on my channel, then people will know who I am. But David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm David Pike. I have I have a PhD in philosophy, so that's kind of the what makes me special.
Cool.
I also have an engineering degree, mechanical engineering. So you're chemical, I gather.
Yeah.
But,
Yep.
um,
Two things just came into my mind, and first is a thumbnail for a video, like PhD philosopher destroys Kevin with facts and logic.
yeah.
But then on a more serious note, I do kind of want to hear, maybe just to start off, I do want to hear about the engineering and the philosophy. So is your undergrad in engineering and then grad school is philosophy, or do you wind up having multiple bachelors?
Yeah, I have two bachelors as well. So I started off in engineering.
Okay.
I got to my last year of engineering and had all my my options left over. I didn't keep up with those throughout, and then I kind of most of my last year was a big portion of it was option courses outside of the engineering department. So I kind of got interested in the stuff that was outside of engineering at that point, and I actually got it was kind of funny, like my final year of engineering, I think it was like the early days of email for me. It was back when email was being was a new thing, but I got this like junk email. I don't know who it was from. I don't know how they got my email address, but just on the making the case for liberal arts education has been something important, and I thought it was interesting, and various things got me thinking, and then I got into working in engineering for a little bit and didn't enjoy it, and I had the life was such that I had the options open to pursue further studies, and so I went ahead and did a bachelor's in philosophy, and then I was interested in history as well, but then I went to philosophy, and then into a master's, which I wrote on kind of a Heideggerian theme, so 20th century sort of existentialist stuff, and then cool. I got into a doctoral program and out at the University of Ottawa. So yeah, my wife and I headed out there, and we were out in Ottawa for about 10 years, and so I did a doctoral thesis which was on basically the metaphysics of transubstantiation out there. So,
ooh, that's gonna give us a lot to talk about. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I talked to a guy once, David Twetton. He's I think he's a professor at Marquette, and he says to me, like, well, you're the world's top expert on transubstantiation, like, oh, really? Yeah, yes. It's like, no, I'm serious. You good for you. Like,
that's pretty cool.
Well, maybe, I guess. Who knows?
That's pretty cool. So, yeah. Before we jump into anything, I just want to say that if I ever did win the lottery, I would go back to school and do a degree in like something philosophy related. I don't know exactly what.
Yeah.
I took one class. So I went to a Polytech Institute. So we didn't offer non-STEM degrees. I went to the New Jersey Institute of Technology. Why? Because I lived in New Jersey and it was the cheapest way for me to get an engineering degree.
Yeah.
My parents made it clear to me. They said, "Kid, we want you to go to college, but pick a cheap school." I got a full ride to the local state school. So I wound up graduating without any student loans whatsoever, which was absolutely the right decision for me. But I didn't get I really didn't get any liberal arts education at all. It was strictly math and science, and that's it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I took one elective course that was called engineering ethics. So it was all about...
Well, that was an elective too.
Yeah, that was an elective. Believe it or not, the electives are all engineering themed. Okay. So it was an elective because it's an ethics course. But we were talking about like the ethics, like, so put yourselves in the shoes of the engineers of the like Apollo disaster or whatever. Like that's kind of like what we were talking about. And I thought that was super interesting. And I'd like, you know, I would love to do more actual classes on things like ethics and then metaphysics and whatever. So maybe one day, you know, when I win the lottery, I'll go back to school. But I think I'm going to school right now. So
exactly. Nothing wrong with being an autodidact, and especially when you're taking opportunities to also get in dialogue with other people.
Yes, and that's exactly why I started the YouTube channel, was because I wanted to be able to have conversations like this, and I've been trying to have conversations like this on Reddit of all places for years, and the conversations are terrible because, first of all, Reddit is just a cesspool of toxicity. And so you try to have like a real conversation with somebody, and next thing you know, they're calling you Hitler. And it's like, you know, you're like, oh, all right, well, I tried. And also just, there's nothing face to face on Reddit. It's all just like writing, you know, it's like trying to have a comment, like a conversation in the YouTube comment section. It's just, that's not how conversations are done. Conversations are best off face to face when possible, but then like, you know, you and I are face to face over the internet now, which is the second best thing. So that is pretty much why I started the channel, is because I wanted to have like exactly this kind of conversation, and you're exactly the kind of guy that I'm looking for too. Somebody who, you know, is the world's leading expert on transubstantiation. So with that, I think let me ask you, do you want to talk about transubstantiation at all? Do you want to jump right into it? Or you and I talked a little bit over email and a little bit in the comment sections too about like other topics. We talked about, what did we talk about over email and such? We talked about like metaphor, right? Like getting lost in metaphor. Like I argue that the church gets lost in metaphor, and like it argues that like the church is truly the bride of Christ. And I say like a church can't truly be a bride. So there's the metaphor thing. There's transubstantiation. There's some other topics too. I'm down to discuss absolutely whatever you want. Take me to school in whatever way you want to take me to school. I'm down.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy for the conversation to go wherever you want to. So
okay. Okay. Let's do transubstantiation. Because
sure.
I you know, if I have an opportunity to pick your brain on one thing, I feel like it should be transubstantiation. So
yeah, I'll tell you, I completed my thesis in 2015, I think it was. So
okay, cool. So not terribly
I haven't
long
forgot
ago.
everything.
Yeah. So I'll tell you of my transubstantiation history, I suppose.
Sure.
So grew up, you know, traditionalist Catholic, was taught about transubstantiation. I knew about accidents and substances, you know, before I knew how to multiply probably, but I never really thought about it, I guess, because it was just like part of like, I knew that that's like, you know, when the bells ring at the mass, that's when the bread is no longer bread. It now is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. It just looks like bread because it has the accidents of bread. And so I never really questioned that until I started doing a deep dive on just all of my religious beliefs. Teleology was the first thing to go. But after I realized that I didn't think that teleology was like veridical, everything else kind of became like open season almost on like all my other beliefs. So I started questioning things that I never really questioned before, and one of them was transubstantiation.
And I think it should, right? I think that if teleology's out, then everything's out.
Kinda, yeah. I mean, I guess I haven't thought about that too much. Like, could someone reject teleology but like accept the rest of like Aristotelian metaphysics? I don't really know, but it seems that way to me right now. So when I got to transubstantiation, I kind of just realized that I thought that things are what their accidents are. Like I didn't really think that substances like were like veridical. Like I thought maybe it's poetic type language, sure, but I didn't think that it was true that there were these things that had substances. So I started reading up on like nominalism and moderate realism and all that. And I realized that I think I'm a nominalist, and granted, major novice here in all things philosophy. But the more that I read up on it, the more that I thought, yeah, I don't think that substances are veridical. I think that things simply are their accidents. And then further, when I got into like Mereology, I became like a Mereological nihilist. So like that complicates things even more. So like when I say that like a thing is what its accidents are, like that's not even quite right, because what I'm really saying is like composite things don't exist. Only simple things exist. But maybe what I'm saying when I say that things are what their accidents are, what I'm really saying there is composite objects are just arrangements of the Mereological symbol. That's kind of like where it went. So, yeah, go ahead, jump in.
In terms of your process of reasoning there, what is the connection you see between, or do you see some kind of crucial connection between nominalism and the rejection of the existence of substances?
So no, not nominalism per se. I don't think that was just kind of like a timeline of events.
Okay.
I could see somebody being a nominalist and still. Well, hold on, no, right? Because a substance is a universal, right? Like chairness.
Well, no, substance is in particular. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Occam would have no problem with transubstantiation. Is he a nominalist? I don't know. The thing with nominalism is it's generally a tricky thing to define, because it's strict nominalism is kind of just insane and nobody actually believes in it. So
what do you mean by strict nominalism?
Well, I mean, how would you define nominalism?
Yeah, so when I say that, like, I think I lean nominalist, what I mean is that I don't think I believe in universals.
Exactly, right. So there are no universals.
Yeah.
But so but there are obviously terms that have common reference to more than one particular thing, right? That refer to whole sets of things.
Mm-hmm.
But there's those sets of things are there's no reality that actually determines that we ought to group that set of things together. That's purely a function of a projection of the mind. And so most people just look at that and you look at a herd of buffalo or whatever, and you say, really, this is so there's nothing in the reality of each of those individual buffaloes that actually determines that actually they belong together as a group. That's purely a function of the name that I've given to all of them and put them in that group. It's like that's insane, right? Nobody actually believes that.
That is actually where I'm at. That is where I'm at. Like, so, and like, I'm even more insane, right? Because I'm a Mereological nihilist.
Yeah. But what would you be your argument for that then? Why would you want to embrace that position?
Because I don't think that it's veridical that there is.
Meaning what?
So like,
that it's not true.
Right.
It's not true that these a pride of lions. Let's just that all of these lions actually have something in common.
So no, certainly like the collections of the Mereological symbols that we linguistically refer to as lions have similarities, and that's why we label them as such.
What do you mean the collection of Mereological symbols?
So I said that on purpose because I'm not actually committed to belief in like this lion qua lion. All I'm committing to is the belief in the Mereological symbols that when arranged in a particular...
sorry, I think I just misheard you. Mereological symbols.
Yes, symbols. Yeah, sorry.
With a P, not a B. Okay.
Yeah, my New Jersey. And also, you're getting a crappy webcam camera, but my recording software is getting my good microphone, so apologies for any kind of audio problems, but...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, go ahead then. You're saying your...
Yeah, question. So essentially the reason why I would deny like that the herd of buffalo exists is the same reason why I deny that any individual buffalo truly exists. What actually exists are the Mereological symbols arranged buffalo-wise. And so when you look at enough mereological simples, they are arranged buffalo herd wise as well. But really what actually exists is only the mereological symbol.
Okay,
So
why is that?
why is that?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you
Like,
actually...
why do you, meaning what, like,
Right.
why
Yeah,
do you
why do I
believe,
think
why
that's the
would you believe
case?
that?
Yeah. So I
Why
think
would,
that's the case because when you actually try to look at a buffalo, there is no such thing as a particular buffalo. So, like you can, it's impossible to define a buffalo in any particular way that will capture every single buffalo. Um, so I'm borrowing heavily from Ted Sider's 2013 essay against parthood. Um, and
so,
he,
so, so
yeah,
can you say that last bit again? It's impossible to define a buffalo in such a way that it would capture every single buffalo.
yeah. Like it's not
Hmm.
quite right to say that every single buffalo has four legs because there are some three-legged buffaloes. You know, it's not quite right to say that every single
Okay.
buffalo.
Well, sure. That's a basic issue in kind of any account of something, that there's the
Mhm.
nature of a thing, and then of course things happen, and that doesn't change the nature of the thing. So, um, but the way it sounds to me is you're you're connecting the issue of whether something exists to the issue of whether we can precisely define it. Now, why would that be the case? Is it also the case that you're some kind of idealist or something, that the criterion for existence is clear and distinct definability or something like that?
No, yeah, I definitely don't think that like something has to be able to be defined for it to be able to exist. I'm sure that there are like, cosmic occurrences that have some kind of like the
Yeah,
mereological simples in outer space are probably arranged in ways that we don't understand.
yeah.
So we can't define that, but those things in outer space probably do exist. So no, I wouldn't say that anything that we can't define doesn't exist. Um, but
So
I
that wouldn't be a good reason for denying the existence of buffaloes,
Yeah.
then, just because we can't define it in a
Yeah,
way that,
yeah, I suppose. Yeah, no. So
well,
that's a
and
good.
that's also kind of begging the question that we can't. But okay,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think I know. Like, I think I understand your point, and it is well received. That's not a good reason to reject the existence of something. Um, but I think it's just more parsimonious to.
yeah. Well, I mean, it
Um,
could be a good reason, but you'd have to build in these other kind of strange idealist premises in
yeah,
order to have it make sense.
yeah. And as far as I'm aware, I'm not an idealist. Like, I'm not inspiring philosophy. I know that he's like an idealist, and he kind of builds his whole like theism off of like simulation theory and stuff. I don't lean that way.
Sorry, who?
His name is Inspiring Philosophy. He's a
Oh,
Christian YouTuber, and he's an
okay, okay,
idealist. Sorry, yeah, uh, he's big in like the Christian Idealism YouTube space, which I
okay.
now that I say that out loud, I realize how like stupid and niche, like how niche that little space is. But um,
Yeah, I happen to be not aware of it too
uh,
much, so
you and 99.9% of
yeah.
everybody else who's ever existed, so you're in good company. But
Okay.
but so the reason why I'm like comfortable with not accepting the existence of something like a buffalo and instead only accepting the existence of the mereological simples is because I think it's more parsimonious. So, to borrow from Sider's language,
Right. Yeah.
you and I agree that A, B, and C exist, but then the person who is not a mereological nihilist posits the existence of this fourth thing, T, where T is just the union of A, B, and C. And so the mereological nihilist just says like, hey, you and I agree that A, B, and C exist, but I don't think that T exists. I just think that A, B, and C exist. And I
Mhm.
stop there. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of where and I think it's just more parsimonious to posit fewer entities. Don't posit a what is which razor is it that's like don't posit
Yeah.
more entities than
Occam's.
is it
Back
Occam's
to Occam.
razor?
Yeah.
Um, so I just think it's more parsimonious, and I think that
So
yeah, go ahead.
so I mean, part like there's a lot of things I might say to that, but I mean, two things that come to mind is well, how do you know it's more parsimonious? Is that just an intuition? And secondly, I mean, you might want to be cautious about conflating parsimonious with simplistic, right? And how do you distinguish an account that's parsimonious from versus account that's simplistic and radically inadequate, right? Given the nature of reality as we ordinarily experience it, right?
Yeah. So let me quickly touch the first one, but then move into the second one because I think there's more meat on the bone there. So how do I know? Well, so I don't. When everything that I say, I'm saying tentatively, because I'm certainly not an expert in anything. So I don't know. Like I'm saying. Move. Oh yeah.
Just carry on. I'm just gonna.
So I don't know, but I have beliefs, and I think that they're justified. But I'm very much so open to changing my mind. So how do you know? Well, I don't know, but I think. And why do I think? Well, because A, B, C, and this fourth thing T, is just one more thing than A, B, and C. So
well, I would just. I mean, it's always a question of like, how do you understand and why do you believe? It's in a philosophical discussion, right? It's not really how do you know. It's like whether you know or not. You say, well, that's kind of begging the question, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's why do you believe? So the thing is, I don't. That it doesn't really answer the question. I don't think to say that. Well, you're kind of just repeating the position when you say that, right? So. Well, it's simpler to believe in less things, right? So it's more parsimonious. But is that a good thing? And do you have any reason to think that that's a better account of reality, right?
Exactly, and that's where I was going to go next. So the 3 being a smaller number than 4 speaks to maybe the simplicity, but it doesn't say anything about parsimony. Because to be parsimonious, it has to have.
It's simple. It's simple in a way, but. I mean that's not an issue, right? It's whether it's simplistic and whether it in any way captures what we actually want to capture about reality and actually gives anything like a satisfying picture of the world as we know it.
Right. Because it's simpler just to say, well, nothing at all exists, but then you're not explaining anything about reality.
Yeah.
So how do I?
Or the idealist answer, right? Is just that, well, nothing exists except
everything's mind.
Ideas that are planted in mind by God. Well, that it could be, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in a way that's simpler because you've eliminated the reality of matter, supposedly. But
yeah.
Is that a good thing? There's certainly nothing that obviously says, well, yeah, that's great. Let's go there. Right?
Yeah.
You have to have some other argument for that.
Well, agreed. And the reason why I'm comfortable with the word parsimony here instead of just the word simple is because I do think that
parsimony means cheap, by the way, right?
Means cheap. Oh yeah, as in well, it explains everything, but for the lowest cost, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in general, the word parsimonious, like he's a parsimonious fellow, means he's not forthcoming with the money. Is
that I actually did not know that. If you describe a person as parsimonious, because I only ever hear that word being used in describing arguments, not describing people. I actually didn't know that. That's funny.
If I'm not mistaken,
I bet you're right. I'm sure you are.
The original.
But so the reason why I do use that word is because mostly, to be honest, it's because of my education in chemical engineering. I don't need to posit any kind of substances for physics or math to work. Just having the Mereological simples is enough for all of physics and chemistry and math to work. Well, I guess math is different, so maybe let me walk back the math part.
Well, yeah.
But at least physics and chemistry.
We'll come back to the math thing in a second.
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
So physics does not rely upon there being buffalo. Just having the Mereological simples arranged physics arranged buffalo wise is perfectly adequate for, like, we can describe every single characteristic of what you would label as a buffalo using only the Mereological simples arranged buffalo wise.
Yeah. Yes. So that's a premise, and from that premise, you can conclude either of one of two things. So then the question is going to be, how do you decide which one? Do you conclude that there are no buffalo, or do you conclude that physics doesn't describe everything?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll tell you that I've gone with the there's no buffalo, and I'll also share with you that I haven't really given a whole lot of time thinking to, well, what if physics just doesn't describe everything? And that's probably because, and I've said this multiple times on my channel, one of my biggest weaknesses probably is also what I think of as my biggest strength. That's like my very empirically minded brain. So I'm probably as close to being like an empiricist as possible without, like, I don't call myself an empiricist, and that's because I'm fine with like the logical laws and stuff. But and
I think also if you want to call yourself an empiricist, that kind of just doesn't really help to explain anything, because then you have to give an account of what that actually means and justify that too. So
that's why I don't call myself one, but I do often describe myself as being like as close as you can be to one without actually being one. So
what does that mean for you then?
So to me, it means that I think that I am bound by methodological naturalism. I think that I'm not going to find any sufficient reason to believe in anything beyond what like science and the scientific method is going to be able to give us solid reason to believe, with the exception, and here's where I'm not where I'm not an empiricist, with the exception of things like the logical laws and then like math. Like math isn't really proved empirically, really. So like, and I'm fine with math. That's why I'm not like a strict empiricist. And like the law of identity, like, X equals X, like, cool, I'm on board. I know I can't prove that the logical law of identity holds for all places all the time, but I'm on board. And that's why I don't call myself an empiricist. But my as close to empiricism as possible is essentially me saying that I'm not willing to believe things that can't be proven without either empiricism or like some direct appeal to something like math.
Okay, but you can't prove anything with empiricism, right? Empiricism is a label used to indicate the stance that you take towards what constitutes a proof. You don't prove something with empiricism.
Right, and if I used the word proof, then that was the wrong word. I think I said belief. I think I said justified belief.
Right, so, I mean, I think I repeated what you actually said, but regardless, if you're talking about justified belief, so what you're saying is those justified beliefs must be empirically proven.
If I was an empiricist, I would say must, right? But I'm not an empiricist because there's a couple things that I'm okay with not being empirically proven.
Okay, so there's two questions then, I guess. Why the exceptions, and what constitutes an empirical proof in the first place?
So why the exceptions?
And,
I think,
well, I guess obviously I'll just point out from the get-go that whatever your notion of this is what an empirical proof is, this is what constitutes an empirical proof, is probably going to be one of those things which you can't empirically prove.
Hold on, would you say that again? Because I want to think about that before I...
So you have on the one hand this exceptional category of things which cannot be empirically proven, which you accept nonetheless. And then you also have the idea that for the rest of it, those things have to be empirically proven, right? But what it means to be empirically proven is going to be one of those things in the first set, something that cannot be empirically proven.
What it means to be empirically proven would be... I'm not sure that I follow.
Well, in order for there to be a meaningful distinction there, you have to be able to say, well, this is what an empirical proof is. And I have some criterion for knowing whether something is empirically proven or not, right? And so, I mean, you're free to give an account of that, but I'm suggesting from the get-go, it's probably going to be that account is probably itself not going to involve any empirical proof. So it's going to belong in the other set of things. So it's going to be one of those funny things which you can't empirically prove.
So it's possible that I'm just not so. I mean, it's not possible. It's definite that I am very dense. I'm a dense person, so it takes me a long time to actually get something through my brain. So I'll be honest and say I still don't think I entirely understand, but maybe I can start to say something, and then like maybe you'll jump in and be like, wait, Kevin, just
maybe have you read any Russell?
No.
Okay.
I'm a real novice, so you know.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll
if you'd read some Russell, I might be able to refer to that to help you out. But
okay.
It's just a matter of sets, and then sets that refer to themselves, and then there's problems that you run into with set theory.
Okay.
With self-referential stuff, but that's all I'm talking about. It's thinking about not only these are the things I think you could empirically prove, but and therefore I believe in them because of that, right? But then there's math, and that's different. But what about the fact that you've made this distinction to begin with? Is that something that you can empirically justify?
Can I empirically justify
that you can justify on empirical grounds that you can make this distinction and it makes sense, and that the things in the empirically provable category are indeed empirically provable? Because whatever your criterion is for that has to be something that you somehow have a justified belief in, right? And if that justified, and I'm suggesting that just if you whatever form that justified belief takes, it's not going to actually take the form of an empirical proof. So why do you believe it? Well, it must be in this other set, but this other category with the mathematical truths. But why does it belong there? Should that and that's the challenge, the question: does it really belong there? Right?
Yeah, maybe I can lay out for you kind of the way that I categorize things, and then maybe you can tell me like, well, hey, look, here's the inconsistency, and then like maybe that'll help me see it, or maybe I'm just using weird language or something, or maybe I'm just understanding the language, like you're using it in its normative sense, and I'm just like a very dull, a very dense boy. That's possible. So let me just kind of lay out for you the way that I see things, and then I'll let you kind of jump in and tell me where I'm wrong. So I see things. So I can't beat hard solipsism.
Sorry, again?
I can't beat hard solipsism.
Okay.
And I definitely can't. I can't do it at all, frankly. But I definitely can't do it empirically, because how do you know you're not just a brain into that, right? Well, I'm willing to accept a certain like baseline level of things that will let me just operate in the world in which I find myself. Those like that number of baseline things include, for instance, like the law of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. As far as I can tell, I need those in order to just like to actually get out of bed in the morning, right, and like function. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'm following what you're saying. So you're putting those in the category of things with mathematical truths, more or less. Those aren't empirically provable, but they're things that you're committed to.
Yes, they. I'm not going to quite put them in the same bucket as math right away, and you might see why. But like the logical laws are things that I cannot prove empirically or otherwise, but I'm willing to accept them because I don't see any way to like go about life without them. But I consider it a noble goal.
Right. So I mean, the basic question there is how do you determine that? How do you know that?
How do I determine that I do need them? Like I do.
So I know that in it brings to mind for me the idea that you have about objective morality being only grounded in intuition or something like that, right? And so it's like this is a criticism for you, right? People just have this intuition about this, and that's a really weak thing. So, but that seems to be kind of what's going on here. I have this intuition that I need this minimally, but that I can do without this other stuff. But that's all just really vague language, right? It's like, well, what makes you, in what sense do you need it, and in what sense can you not do without it, and in what sense are these other things that you claim you can do without, such as denying the existence of lions or cats? Well, you have a cat, right?
I have four. I have 4 cats.
4 cats. Yeah.
I wonder if you can't see any of them right now.
Yeah. So, so you don't really have 4 cats, though.
But I do have 4 collection. I do have 4 arrangements of Mereological simples, which are each arranged cat-wise.
Right, and so you can get by with you can get by with saying that. So why can't you equally well get by with denying the law of non-contradiction?
Yeah, because science would fall apart.
It wouldn't though. It wouldn't though.
How would it not fall apart?
It's a controversial thesis in modern logic, right? But anything follows from a contradiction in formal modern logics. So if you have P and not P, therefore you can say anything follows, including science, including everything that we believe is science follows from a contradiction. So this is just a formal theorem of modern logic.
I have to admit, I don't understand that at all.
It's strange, that's for sure, and that's one of the things that critics of modern logic say, like, that's not just strange, that's really troubling and weird, and indicates that there's certain aspects of modern logic which fundamentally fail to capture what a good system of logic ought to capture. But I mean, that's logic for you. So and that's the problem too with appealing to the law of non-contradiction, because it's just a matter of that's a wholly general thesis, right? But then what does that even mean in practice? Well, that has to be worked out in terms of an actual system of logic, and in terms of an actual application of that system of logic, whether it's a super formalized or not. It has to be worked out in terms of an actual application of your system of logic and your rules of logic to things, which is, guess what, always problematic.
Remember when I called myself dense? I have to admit, I'm really lost now. So I don't think that I understood really any of that.
Okay.
So maybe I can ask you a question. So you said if you have like these 2 premises, P and then not P, literally anything follows.
Well, it's not that you have 2 premises, but that you have any proposition in logic is that when you go to form propositions in logic, there are a set of syntactical rules for forming well-formed propositions, right? So one of the kinds of well-formed propositions is P and not P. So that's a single proposition. So it's where you're it's not the assertion of 2 separate premises, but it's the conjunction. It's a single.
So as far as I can tell, P and not P is just simply like a false statement.
Right, but it can be, it's a contradiction, right?
Right.
Nonetheless, you can assert a contradiction.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's why anything follows from it, because that indicates you've asserted the breakdown of the most basic rule within the whole logical system. And you say, well, you can't do that, but you can. And the point in looking at it logically is to see what follows from that assertion. And so what follows from that assertion is not that you have to throw out science. What follows from that assertion is absolutely anything and everything and nothing, right? But science is one of the things that can follow from that assertion of P and not P. In other words, of the denial of the law of non-contradiction.
Sure, but every time that we attempt to falsify the law of non-contradiction, we fail to falsify it. So, like, if science follows,
I don't know how do you even attempt to falsify it though? That's what does that even mean?
I mean, I guess that's
it's a logical. Like the thing to understand here is that it's a logical law. It's like you can't falsify a logical statement. It's understanding the connection of ideas, right? So there's no. It's not an empirical claim. It's sketching out the way that ideas are necessarily connected.
Well, yeah, but I mean, something that comes to mind as like a way for us to see if we could falsify the law of non-contradiction is like we could look at any one time and place, we could look at any one atom or planet, like pick your scale, and then we could just say that like the coordinates of Earth at this very moment is X, and then like let's also check at that same moment if the coordinates are anything else besides X. And we'll find that it's never anything else besides X for any given time. Like that's one way that we could attempt to falsify the law of non-contradiction. And whenever we do that, not that anybody actually runs tests on this, but if we did, we would find that Earth perfectly obeys, like the position of Earth in the solar system perfectly obeys the law of non-contradiction. And so does literally everything else that we've ever observed ever. So that's kind of what I mean when I say like falsifying it. You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's two things I'd say about that. On the one hand, you can't do those. You can't test that empirically. It's not possible. And on the other hand, it's irrelevant to the point, which is about the logic of contradiction. Because the point about the logic of contradiction, and well, I mean, I don't know how strongly I want to get behind modern logic, right? So
and to be honest, if you did really try to get behind modern logic, I might lose it entirely. Like I might just not understand. To be honest.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, just to, like, modern logic being the logic that sort of began with Frege and developed through like Russell, and so this was like late 19th century into early 20th century, and so they're it's odd, but it's one way of conceptualizing the logical space of ideas, right? And it is the system of logic which most scientifically minded people, let's say in the 20th and now into the 21st century here, would say, yeah, that's what logic is for me. And so I mean, it's something that might take some time to wrap your head around, but it's just that is the consequence of asserting a contradiction. It does not follow that science doesn't work, because science is an autonomous set of practices, whatever. You can start to give substantive reasons for it, right? But in terms of just the purely formal logic of it, nothing follows from the denial of the law of non-contradiction.
Yes, and I think I made a breakthrough here.
Everything possibly follows from it.
Yeah. So I think your point. Let me see if I can.
Like, I can put it really simply in terms of the P and not P. You can say P and not P, therefore P. Right?
Yeah,
like
sure.
You say P and not P, therefore not P.
Right. P and not P, therefore
P,
anything
therefore
goes.
Q.
Right. Yeah. Anything goes. So I think I get it now. I think that your point here is that, like, if you just reject the law of non-contradiction, anything goes. Anything goes. Science doesn't necessarily not work.
Certainly don't. What's that?
Science doesn't necessarily not work just because you reject the law. So I think I actually get it, and I think I actually kind of agree.
Yeah.
But the place where my brain goes after that is, okay, sure, the rejection of the law of non-contradiction doesn't say that science itself cannot exist. However, science, when it does try to falsify the law of non-contradiction, has never been able to falsify it. Yeah. Now, you made a comment where you say it's impossible.
There's a reason for that, though, right? It's because science has never tried to falsify the law of non-contradiction. And, right, so that's one part of the reason, but it's not the most fundamental part of the reason. The more fundamental reason is that because science works based on the law of non-contradiction. So it's a presupposition of science.
No, I don't think that's the case.
Okay, well, what branch of science is the branch of science that investigates the law of non-contradiction
I mean,
and attempts to work out theoretical alternatives to it? Like the only branch of science that I know of that does that is logic, which is not one of the natural sciences, not what you're referring to when you say science, right?
right. No, I'm definitely not referring to logic when I say science, but things like physics would be able to, and in some ways, like, now I kind of hate discussing quantum physics because I know enough physics to know how much I don't know, if that makes sense. But I feel like the whole discussion about quantum physics is a giant discussion about the law of non-contradiction. And I think that science is certainly capable of observing
It's not
things.
though. It's clearly not. If you look at any of the literature, I don't. Is that what you find? This is a crucial test of the law of non-contradiction.
So they won't phrase it like that.
Well, just put it this way. How would you? I'm probably no more an expert on quantum physics than you are, but what's the basic proposition of quantum physics, quantum mechanics that you'd want to say,
Energy and matter.
This is what it is. What's that?
So were you asking like what is the basic proposition of quantum physics?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say like energy and matter are the same thing. That's kind of like how I. And
Okay.
so then like weird things follow from that. Like
So that do you take that that's somehow an investigation of or relevant to the law of non-contradiction?
not
No.
just energy and matter being the same thing. But then we
Okay.
wind up having these weird things like electrons that sometimes behave like waves and sometimes they behave like particles. So how is
Right.
it that an electron is both a wave but not a wave at the same time? Stuff like that.
Okay, but so how is it a wave and not a wave?
Yeah.
Is that
So
what
like
you said?
yeah, it would be so if P in our like example is just
Right.
being a wave, then like
Yeah.
in a way, quantum physics investigates if an
See,
electron could be P and not P at the same time.
right. But I think that's definitely a mischaracterization because what it investigates is how it can be a wave and a particle at the same time, right? How it can display characters, how it can have characteristics of a wave and characteristics of a particle. And the question is about which category does it belong in, and we can't decide which one it belongs in. But it's certainly not an investigation of whether photons or electromagnetic radiation is made up of waves and not waves at the same time, or particles and not particles, right? Because a particle is not the same thing as a not wave. Not wave is a contradiction of wave, right? Particle is not a contradiction of wave.
Yeah, actually, I think I do agree with you. Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's about the conceptualization of weird things that we don't have a lot of direct sensory experience of. But that's just not about testing the law of non-contradiction. I think like that's a standard part of any investigation is when you have apparent contradictions and you're trying to understand how to work those out, right? But that it's always a presupposition nonetheless in any kind of investigation like that what you're trying to do is figure out how there's not a contradiction here. So it's not an investigation of the principle of non-contradiction, but it's an attempt to see how it applies in a particular domain, or to figure out how we can conceive of a particular domain in light of the presupposition of the law of non-contradiction.
Let me think out loud for a second because I think I'm pretty much on board, but let me just try to like, throw something against the wall and see if it sticks. So I have this concept of like there are properties of waves and then there's properties of particles that do not overlap. So, and if one thing displays, no, because it could be like a third thing. Like it could just be like there could be like a thing that's neither a wave nor a particle and has some properties of the one and some properties of the other. That's
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so I think I am actually on board then with the whole like quantum physics does not try to address the question of like if the logical laws hold. I think I'm on
Yeah.
board with that.
Yeah, and just a little note about that. Properties can be a metaphysical term that's kind of loaded too. So you might even just want to like back off from the word
The word
property in that
property,
context
yeah.
and just say phenomenal characteristics, so that we associate with waves, and phenomenal characteristics we associate with particles, or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think that's a
And
fair
that's
point.
going to be more parsimonious too. And so in the end, it might also, when you start actually working through the whole details of particle physics, say our best account, current account of particle physics, it might be best to say that basic particles don't exist either. What exists are characteristics that we associate with and that we've chosen to label as, right? And that's what you maybe ought to do as certainly as a nominalist, and as committed radically to Occam's razor.
Yeah. Well,
but, but there's just a massive problem with that whole thing anyway, because there are never any criteria for saying, well, when have you got to the right point and being parsimonious here? But you could certainly make that argument in principle, right? Well, it's going to be more parsimonious here to only talk about phenomenal characteristics, insofar as, which again, pushing in the direction of idealism. So,
and well, I will share with you that I'm not committed to the idea of any particular particles being the simples.
yeah.
When I speak about mereology, I try to
So
use the word.
it's more a matter of then I don't know what exists.
Yeah, I think that our best science today is pointing to quantum fields kind of being like, and particles are just like where different quantum fields overlap. So if the mereological simples are just the quantum fields, then great. Like atoms don't exist, protons and neutrons don't exist, quarks don't even exist. What really does exist are these quantum fields that overlap in certain areas, and that's it. And like I'm okay with that, and I'm also at
Yeah.
peace with the idea that 100 years ago we thought that atoms were the mereological simples, but then we discovered
Yeah.
protons, neutrons, and electrons, and then we thought
Well,
that they were the simples. So I don't know what
yeah.
the simples are, and so in that sense, you're right. I don't know what really exists, but I'm going to call whatever exists the simples, and I'm going to be as at peace with that as I can be.
Yeah, but we still haven't really made any progress on addressing the question as to why you would think that that's what our best science tells us is all that exists, right? Because most
Yeah.
science, like the point, the obvious point, really, is that your best particle physicists are not, for the most part, going to be mereological nihilists who deny that cats exist,
Yeah,
right?
true. But
So either they're incompetent scientists and they don't understand what their science is telling us, or your thesis isn't a scientific thesis at all, right? It has nothing to do with what science tells us exists. It has entirely to do with what Ted Sider thinks science tells us exists.
well,
It's in other words, it's a philosophical position entirely,
right. I was going to introduce a
and,
third. I was going to
and it
introduce
has
a
no
third
empirical
option.
grounding in any empirical science, right?
Well, it definitely borrows from empirical sciences.
Well, it appeals to, but it's not grounded in, right?
Um.
And if it did, then anybody who was competent in those sciences would see that this follows from it. But that's not the case.
Well, so
Unless you want to make the radical thesis that a lot of supposedly competent scientists, particle physicists, are actually incompetent because they don't see what their own science that they're experts in implies, right?
So I'm certainly not trying to imply that these scientists are all incompetent, but I would say that a lot of them actually do say the same thing that Sider says. They just don't use the term mereological nihilism because they're not philosophers.
Well, they certainly can say the same thing, right? But they hopefully don't say that they've discovered this in the course of their scientific work,
Well,
because
it's not so much something that you discover, right? It's like
right, it's not.
nihilism. It's more of just like the rejection. Like I feel like mereological nihilism is more the rejection of like non-nihilism than the assertion of act. You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense?
Can you say it again?
So the Mereological nihilist just says, I don't believe you, to the Mereological non-nihilist. It's not so much that the Mereological nihilist is
So
making...
it's a, yeah. So I mean, put that way, it's just pure faith.
No. So,
Well, it sounds okay.
So if I'll say me and I'll say you for the Mereological nihilist and the Mereological non-nihilist, I don't actually know your take on Mereology, though. As a Catholic, I can assume that you're not a Mereological nihilist, but
as a sane person, you mean?
So
it certainly doesn't follow from Catholicism, we say. It just follows from, yeah, a much more
like intuition,
a sense of what exists in the world. It's
yeah.
That's not something that you have to, well, let me see, what does the creed say about that? Like, no, nothing, right?
Yeah. My point there was more like, I think it's incompatible. Like, I don't think that a Catholic could be.
I hear you.
Yeah. But what I mean when I say that it's just I don't believe you, what I mean is this. You and I both say that we believe, we agree that A, B, and C exist, but then you say that A, B, and C make this union of T, and I think that T really exists. And then I just say, I don't believe you. That's kind of it. As far as I can tell.
Yeah. So how is that any different from just kind of a blunt? Well, I mean, is it even a rational position at all then, or is it purely like, it sounds like it's just kind of this pure faith kind of thing? I don't have any reason for it. Everybody else thinks, picnic tables exist, but say, hey, go over to the picnic table. Well, wink, wink. That's not really a picnic table. That picnic tables don't exist. And it's like, okay, this guy's crazy, right?
Well, I would make the argument that like 99.9% of people haven't actually thought about this at all. So
right, but you're not. The thing is, when you make your case for it, you're not giving them any reason to think about it. You're just saying, well, I deny that picnic tables exist. So there's. I mean,
well, one reason is the
thinking
parsimony.
about parsimony. Parsimony, you have to think about it also. Like the problem with parsimony is like, well, where exactly does parsimony apply, right? Does it apply to? Is it the same as Occam's razor, where I'm just going to shave off everything I can, or do you want to apply parsimony to your grasp of the world in terms of how much do I need to shave away here, right? Because you're being very unparsimonious and saying, well, I'm going to shave away the existence of pretty much everything that exists and say I have no idea what really, well, that's too strong maybe, but I don't really know what exists at all. I don't have any, there's some quantum field thing, but that's it. Like that's very unparsimonious in terms of how much you have to cut away from our ordinary understanding of the world, right? So it's the exact opposite of parsimony in terms of an explanation in that sense, right?
I disagree pretty strongly here, actually. And the reason why I say that is, so again, this is a point that Sider brings up, but the idea that you and I and the table and a cat are mostly empty space is deeply unintuitive.
Right, and it's also deeply wrong, right?
No, it's true.
It's not true.
We are mostly empty space.
Well, that hinges on your definition of space, right? So space is not a term which is analytically definable, right? Space is a term which can only be defined in relation to our experience of space, right? So you can define space in one way. You can define space in one way within a certain set of experiences and concepts. And you say, well, in relation to the passage of a neutrino or something, you are empty space, right? But this comes back to the basic meaning of words, though, and the basic meaning of the word existence is going to be the big one for you. But if we start with space, it's a little bit more constrained concept, right? The basic meaning of the word space is determined how? Well, it's determined the basic way in which all words are determined, which is how? It's based on use, right? How do we use a word? That's what determines what that word means, right? So you say, well, but I've come up with another use for the same word. Okay, but that's equivocation, right? So that doesn't get us anywhere logically. You can't prove something by making up a new definition for a word and then equivocating, right? Using the same word in two different senses, in two radically different senses, and then thinking that you've made a sound logical argument. Equivocation is a basic fallacy, right?
Certainly, yeah. To equivocate is to
But
make.
that's what Sider's doing. It's just equivocation, using the word
So
space in that sense.
so help me understand how Cider and myself are equivocating on the word space. Like, how is the space between a nucleus and the closest electron shell? How is the space between there like not the same kind of space that's the space between me and the camera? You know, like how is that different?
Because it's a functional concept, right? So what counts as space in a given context is going to depend on how we're using that concept, right? So that's a universal logical principle, right? That's almost pre-logical. It's Wittgenstein talks about grammar. I can't remember exactly, but he uses he uses the word grammar a lot, but it's kind of about specifying the basic way in which we use words to begin with before we even get to the point of making logical statements, right? Logically evaluable statements. So you have to, and that's a fundamental thing in general, right? You can't get into a logical discussion with someone who doesn't know how to talk yet, right? You have to learn to talk first, and you have to learn to get a grasp of the meaning of words. And in the course of doing that, you're also getting a rudimentary grasp of logic. But you have to start with grammar, right? And logic works that way too. The formal logic, you have to start with constructing a syntax. This is how. These are the basic elements that make up a logical statement within this formal system of logic. And this is how you make a well-formed statement. And you can't make these other kinds of well-formed, these other kinds of statements. They're not well-formed, and they can't be part of a logical conversation, right? So this is part of what precedes any kind of logical conversation, including one that is within the domain of the natural sciences. It's that you have to have an understanding of the terms that you're using, right? And what those terms mean is very complicated. It can be very tricky because the meaning of those terms depends on use, and as you develop different thoughts about that use those terms, the meanings of those terms can change. So and then you can end up having thoroughly equivocal notions, right? But
yeah, I'd like to risk something.
Sure.
I'd like to risk butchering your stance, but I'm going to put it into my own words. And I'm very, very positive that I'm misunderstanding you. But I'm going to put it into my own words so that you understand the way that I understand it, and then you can let me know where I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So here goes. This is going to be bad, but here goes. The lexicon of our speech is hold on. I need to think about this for a second, because so your point here is that the word for space has like a use in English language, and we don't use that word to describe like interatomic distances. Therefore,
that's only one of the uses, but lexicon is a good thing to think about, right? Or just a dictionary, right? Lexicon is basically another word for dictionary, right? It's a collection of the words.
Yeah,
I guess that's where it comes from, right? And then it's a whole listing of all the different word meanings for these words. And so it's one of the things that scientists don't do is edit dictionaries, right? So particle physicists don't come along and say, oh, we're going to update the entry on space in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, because we've discovered that all of these other uses of the word space are wrong, and this is the real one.
They definitely don't do that. That's true. But
And not only don't they, but they shouldn't, and they couldn't. And if they tried to do that, that would just prove that they were insanely megalomaniacal and confused about the basic nature of language and human intelligence and human understanding and what they're doing as scientists, right?
But help. So where I'm still lost, I think, is that your point is that Cider and then the rest of the people who assert that we are indeed mostly empty space are equivocating on the word space,
yeah.
and that's where I still don't understand. Like I still don't understand how the interatomic space is different than the space that's not interatomic.
Well, it's like the whole equivocation is essential in terms of one way that the law of non-contradiction can go wrong, right? So that's what equivocation is essentially about. So the law of non-contradiction is about, like, contradiction is saying against, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's when I say one thing and then I say the opposite, and those don't fit together, right? So this is space and then this is not space. And then if I've got a concept where I've got, well, two different applications of the same term, which can be analogically related, maybe, right? But they don't apply in the same way. And then I insist, well, there's a contradiction here because you're using that same term in two different senses. It's like, well, sure, there's a verbal contradiction there, but you're just failing to notice a basic fact about language, that language is systematically, analogical in the one sense and sometimes equivocal. So maybe I'm wrong to say it's entirely equivocal, but insofar as you're trying to derive a conclusion about, like the other option to equivocal language is analogical language, right? So maybe it would be better if I said, well, this isn't entirely equivocal, the space between you and your computer and the space between, well, the open space that a neutrino can pass through in your body or whatever. There's definitely an analogy there, right? But they're not the same kind of thing. They don't function at the same level, and the one it would be a false dilemma to say, well, you've got to choose one or the other, right? This is the right notion of space here, and this other notion of space where, I can't pass my own hand through my own chest. It's like, why? Well, because it's not empty space. There's something in the way there, right? It's like, well, yeah, that's right, and because my chest doesn't exist, that's why I can't pass my hand through it. Sorry?
It is mostly empty space.
Well, it is mostly empty space in one sense, but it's not empty space at all in another sense, right? So that's just where you have to kind of reckon with the obvious fact that space is used in more than one way, and unless you have an argument for saying, well, this is the right way and the only right way to use that word, then you don't really have an argument, you just have an equivocation.
I don't think that I understand the sense in which the word space would be used if that word means something like everything is not mostly empty space. Like, I'm not sure what the word space means at that point anymore.
Well, I was just gonna say, well, obviously we could just, like, let's open up the dictionary and see what does it say, right?
Probably says something like the distance between,
and the answer. What? Sorry.
I assume that space probably is like the distance between, like, points or something like that, right? Like,
well, I mean, the point is that the dictionary is going to tell us that competent language users of the English language use space in a whole bunch of different ways.
Oh yeah, sure.
Right. And so one of the ways in which competent users of the English language are going to use the word space is to say that, well, there's a lot of space in this room, but there are also a lot of, solid objects which take up space in the room. And if I was to, I don't know, what could I get? A bunch of sand or something and keep on shoveling, I could fill up all that space in that room and there'd be no more space left. Or books, I could keep on filling my bookshelf until there's no more space on the bookshelf. And he said, what are you talking about? It's still almost all empty space. Put more books on there. And it's like, well, okay, you really demonstrated kind of a reductio absurdum of Mereological nihilism here, because it's and shown that it's really just based on an odd kind of equivocation.
So I think that I understand much better now, but I still think that I agree. I think that the thing that's getting reductio ad absurdum is human intuition. Human intuition is wrong. Often.
Well, you can always say that, right? But your only grounds for saying that are human intuition.
No. So, I'm saying that based off of like science and the scientific method.
But that doesn't follow from science or the scientific method. That follows only from your intuition about what science and the scientific method say, right?
So I have to have a certain level of understanding of the science in order to understand the science. Like, that's a tautology. But that's not how I use the word intuition. Like, to me, an intuition is not like your understanding of science. Like, because I would agree with you intuitively that the bookshelf is full. But then I'll say, scientifically, though, the bookshelf is not full. Bookshelf is mostly empty space. It could be both true that the bookshelf is not full, but it also doesn't have enough space for you to add a single extra
I don't think that has anything to do with the scientific position, though, and it doesn't have anything to do with the critique of human intuition. It just has to do with the fact that you're not seeing that you're just using the word space in two different ways.
You're right. I'm not seeing that yet. Like,
yeah, because the reality is, like, again, it just comes back to we do use words in different ways, and the fact that I use the word space in one way in one context, I use the word space in a different way in another context. That's not a contradiction, right? It's just a matter of the fact that use words. This is the way human language works. It's an ineliminable function of it, and it's not a matter of human intuition either. It has nothing to do with that. It's just an artifact of the way human language works and necessarily works, as far as anybody could ever see it. I don't think, if you grasp the way human language works, I don't think that there's any kind of an argument that you can even start to make that language could work any other way, right? And language stands below science. You don't have science except on the basis of human language. So you can't use science to critique the fundamental nature of human language. That's removing the foundation on which science rests.
You can do science without human language. You just wouldn't be able to communicate. You wouldn't be able to communicate it to anybody else, but you could do it.
No, you can't.
Sure you can.
No, you can't.
Mute caveman Grok can do all sorts of experiments to see what catches on fire and what doesn't. And then he can come to some kind of conclusion that, like, dry leaves catch on fire, but wet leaves do not. That's science.
Well, how do you know he's okay? Well, how do you know he's come to that conclusion if he doesn't tell you that's his conclusion?
Well, I wouldn't know.
Let's just say that's caveman Kevin, right? So it's you're the caveman, and you can do all these experiments. But what determines that you're doing experiments apart from an understanding grounded in language that what you're doing is an experiment?
You don't have to use the word experiment. You don't even have to know that it is an experiment. But as long as you've figured it out, then you're doing the scientific method. Like, I would argue that
how do you figure it out without being able to tell yourself, this is what I figured out?
The great apes do this all the time, and the great apes don't have language.
Well, that's really interesting, because what you're really saying is you're committed to scientific method, but you believe that actually writing up your scientific results is not part of the scientific method.
Peer review can be no,
it's not peer review. No, nothing to do with peer review. Just writing up your results.
Oh, sure. So even
is not part of scientific method. And you don't have to write them up, but even being able to say these are the results of my experiment is not part of scientific method.
I guess
that is a radically naive and absolutely divorced from reality understanding of how science works, right? So you can claim that science doesn't have to work this way, but that is entirely an ad hoc assertion, which is based on completely ignoring the whole actual history and found institution, ongoing actuality of science as we know it, right?
So, but I mean, we were just talking about how words have different meanings. And so if you're referring to like the institution of modern science, then I would agree that writing it is part of it. But people were doing science before we had the words for the scientific method and before the invention of
but not
journals.
before language, right? So writing it down is incidental. Sorry?
Well, the great apes, I would argue, they do science in their own primitive ways. But
okay, so which great ape are you thinking of?
Orangutans.
Okay, so what science do orangutans do?
They can use sharp objects to spear for fish. And so they figured out
that science.
Well, they follow the scientific method. They assuming some of them tried to fish.
That's like saying
again. So this is
that's like
it's
saying
the
if I
definition
take a
of
sharp
words,
stick,
right?
If I take a sharp stick and stab you, then I'm doing science. It's like, okay, this is a new word now that you're doing a different thing now. You're saying space has to mean this thing. Now you're taking the word science and saying science can mean this other thing that nobody understands it to mean.
Yes.
It's like, well, it can, but nobody uses the word science that way. Right?
Yes, and I'm willing to use.
If you give yourself license to use words in that way, then you can prove absolutely everything, right? And you've essentially lifted all constraints upon the meaning of words, which means that the law of non-contradiction becomes meaningless because you can make words mean whatever you want them to mean.
Sure, I can do that, and that makes me a very poor communicator. So the important thing is that you and I understand each other when we talk, right?
No, it's not a poor communication issue, though. It's a matter of this is what follows from reasoning in that way, right?
What follows from reasoning in what way?
A complete breakdown of the whole law of non-contradiction, right? If you give because the law of non-contradiction doesn't say anything in itself. The law of non-contradiction only says something insofar as we apply it, right? In order to apply it, we have to have meaningful terms to which it's applied. In order to have meaningful terms to which it's applied, we have to have language. In order to have language, we have to be, we start as children and we have to learn that language. And so we have to learn what words mean and what they don't mean. But if we get to that end of that process and we say that words can mean whatever I want them to mean, so now science means stabbing a fish with a spear and that's science, well then, okay, then there's no longer any way to derive actual conclusions that this is contradictory, right? Because you can just say, well, sure, there's no contradiction. It's just this word means a new thing now.
So I'm not using this in like a weird fringe way.
You are.
No, there's definitely a distinction. I will agree with you that there is a distinction between like the modern conception of science where we do have a process of peer review. So like earlier today, I was filming a video.
I would insist peer review is irrelevant.
Okay,
go ahead.
I won't even go with peer review. I'll just say literally writing words down. The modern conception of science includes writing words down. But people were using, and
it doesn't necessarily though, right? It doesn't necessarily.
Okay, people were.
It does include all, and
I'm trying to help. I really am.
It's thinking in terms of words, right? It's thinking using words, like that. That's what is required.
Yes, let's stick with that. The modern conception of science and the conception of science for the past, 10,000 years, or well, actually, science hasn't even been around for like 10,000 years, but whatever, has included language, at least thinking in language, at least. Agreed. Done. Like we agree. However, I think that you and I will also agree on this sentence, and I'm going to purposefully not use the word science in this sentence. Before language was invented, living organisms were trying different things to accomplish various ends. They noticed that some of those things worked and some of them didn't. They stopped doing the things that didn't work and they continued doing the things that did work, and they iterated on them until those things got better. And animals have been doing this since before language began. I think that you and I probably agree on what I just said, right?
Yeah.
So, I was using the word science to mean the iterative process of testing things, seeing what works, and then sticking with the good stuff and dropping the bad stuff.
What you're saying is animals have cognition, right? They have cognitive powers. It's like, yes, they do.
Yeah, sure.
No doubt about it. But they don't do science.
If you don't include anywhere in your definition of science just like this baseline iterative process of trying things.
I mean, look at it this way, though, Kevin. You show me anywhere where there's a definition of science that applies to what you're saying. Does anybody use the word science in that way?
Sure. I mean, when you learn about the scientific method in school, it's just like the iterative process of.
But I mean, that's what I'm thinking with that. That's not the scientific method we learn in school. The scientific method we learn at school is
making predictions and
exactly.
But I mean, I would argue
you have
that
a hypothesis, you test it to see if it's true or false. You
write
up your results.
These animals are doing
then
with
you
the
draw a conclusion,
sticks.
right? You don't just keep like pounding on a coconut until you find a way that it breaks.
Yeah,
that doesn't qualify for the scientific method.
Right. But an otter using a rock to break open a clam instead of using their fists was the result of, and so a certain otter made a prediction. I think that using this rock will help. And they tried it and it worked. And the otters have stuck with it. That one otter made a prediction, tested the prediction, found out that it worked, and now all otters hold rocks to break open clams.
So you're saying that otters make a prediction. So,
and I'm comfortable with not using the word science. Like if that's what it takes for us to communicate properly, I'm okay with. I'm not married to words in that way.
Sorry, you're okay with.
Like if it's going to help us progress with the conversation, for me just to agree, okay, this is not what science means, then I'm happy to just be like, okay, I won't use that word in that manner anymore and move on. Because I'm not married to words in any particular like way.
No, it's fine to want to defend any particular view, right? But it's just that's not how we use the word science but
then
also
say no more.
Within the scientific method, right? Otters don't make predictions because addiction is saying something, right? It's saying something in advance. I think this is going to happen, right? So otters don't do that.
The word sopa in Spanish doesn't mean soap. It means soup. So the word prediction doesn't actually mean that you have to say something. It just means that you have to think that something's going to occur, right?
Well, that is the meaning of the term, though. It's saying in advance. That is actually the meaning of the term. So you can say, like there's no reason. You could say, well, it's as if it made a prediction, but if it didn't actually say something in advance, then, well, parsimony again. There's no reason to think that it was a prediction. It just happened. And it learned. You can't deny that, right? It learned, and then the others learned from that and passed on that behavior.
Is thinking
but
in
there was
advance.
There's no reason to think there was a prediction involved. And if you do want to say, well, that doesn't seem parsimonious at all, right? As well as not comporting.
So would thinking in advance instead of speaking in advance, would that count to you as
for sure
prediction?
For sure, yeah.
Okay. So prediction,
mental speech, right? Like
okay,
it's the same thing.
And so you don't think that an otter thought in advance that the rock would help with the clam? You think that the otter just grabbed the rock for no reason and slammed it against the clam for no reason and then found it?
No, I don't think the otter thought in advance anything, right? Because I don't think otters think.
Otters certainly think.
Well, I don't. It depends how you want to use the word, right?
And here we go again with more definitions.
Yeah. So I think you have to have words in order to think. So otters don't have words, so they don't think.
I disagree. I'm willing, though, to let this one drop here if you wanted to move on to a different topic. I've already stolen Oh my gosh, an hour and a half of your time.
Like, honestly, I think you ought to be eliminative about this. You ought to be an eliminative materialist, and you ought to say there are no such things as thoughts. You shouldn't be telling me that others be thinking. You should be saying that we don't even think. Right?
Yeah, so I actually do. I'll confess to you that I'm not like well versed enough in like the different mental theories to like say I'm an eliminativist for sure. But the way that I hear it described is something that I'm quite sympathetic to. And if you asked me in which direction I lean, I probably would say eliminativism. I think that thoughts are just brain states. Like thoughts are neurons in your brain that are firing back and forth and stuff like that. So that is my current belief. And again, not well versed enough to actually like defend it in, but that's how I lean. That's how I lean right now, is that I believe that thoughts are brain states. Yeah.
Yeah. So you notice the time there. Go ahead, carry on with that.
Well, I was going to say, like, I would love to like pick your brain on transubstantiation or something like that. But to be honest, I mean, it's been an hour and a half already. If it was up to me, I would literally keep you for another hour and a half, another hour and a half after that, another hour and a half after that.
Yeah. But if you get too long, it gets unwieldy though. Right?
Exactly. It does. I'm almost tempted just to kind of hand you the microphone for any kind of like final thoughts and then let you go and just say, I would love to have another conversation with you sometime. My final thoughts are, I would have loved to get to transubstantiation with you, but I think that we probably kind of can't until we get this out of the way first, in as much as transubstantiation is all the way up like here, and it's built on this and this and this and this and this. Yeah. And you and I disagree about all the way down here. So like, why would we talk about substances and accidents and the ability of a thing to have the substance change while the accidents remain the same? Like, we can't possibly talk about that unless we've already agreed on all this baseline stuff. And we currently don't agree. So that's why we have to start here. So I wish that you and I could talk about transubstantiation because you're the expert and I would like love to, but it's almost like what's even the point of talking about that if that conversation would quickly devolve to exactly where we were, because I would say something like, well, I don't think that substances exist. And then that would move us down a peg. And then I would say, well, I don't think that's right. That would move us down. And we would wind up exactly where we were. So that's kind of, my closing thought is that, I think that this was awesome. I loved this conversation. I would love to do this again. And I'm very dense, and I apologize for being very dense. But I think I made progress today. Like I think that there was times where like a light bulb actually went off. So I'm proud of my, pat on the back, Kevin. Those are my closing thoughts.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, you're a bright guy. It's listening to you brings back like the old days of undergrad philosophy, all those kind of exciting new ideas that it's cool, right? To get into all these new ideas that it's like, whoa, that's a new way of looking at things, right? But it's cool. I just wanted to say about the transubstantiation, like there are two ways to approach that, right? So you obviously there's a sense in which, hey, what you can't even agree that a cat exists. Let's not bother talking about transubstantiation. But I mean, the other way to get to that is to say, well, let's just assume for the purposes of conversation that cats do exist and substances, and then let's characterize them, and then let's move to making sure we understand what this concept is. It doesn't matter if you don't assent to it, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't matter if you don't believe it, but let's just try to understand it and state it properly. So it's like talking about, like an atheist talking about theism. Well, sure, you can do that, right? You don't have to believe in God to understand accurately what the theories of theism are, and vice versa, right? So, So there are two possible ways to approach that question for sure.
I mean, if you're ever free again and you'd be interested in a conversation about transubstantiation, I would love to kind of put back on maybe like a merely Christian a la C.S. Lewis hat, or maybe not even like a merely Christian, maybe like a deism hat or something like that. And then I'm going to say like, okay, get me to transubstantiation. Like all I'm at is like some kind of uncaused cause, and that's it. Yeah. Get me there. Exactly. Like that would be fun. That would be cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, you know how to reach me. I have your email too. This has been a blast. Thank you
All right,
so
great.
much, and apologies for I kept you much longer than I thought. So,
Oh
really,
no, yeah, that's fine.
yeah, really appreciate you
Yeah,
being here. And
yeah, it was fun. Thank you too. I appreciate
yeah,
you.
all right, man. Thanks.